Hello, everybody, and welcome to the monthly NASW Pennsylvania Chapter webinar. My name is Rachel Rose, and I am a Membership and Communication Strategist. This is a free webinar series, and it is done as a member benefit and is available to members only. Webinars are done each month on the last Wednesday of the month at 12 p.m. and count for 1 CE credit. During the webinar, if you have any questions, type them into the questions section of the menu on the side. To obtain your CE credit, you must attend a minimum of 50 minutes of this webinar. After the webinar, if you attended the 50 minutes, you will receive an email with a link to complete an evaluation. The link will also be posted in the chat section of the webinar. The certificate will be sent to you via email in a few weeks. Note that the certificates are not automatically generated, and it will be sent by one of our staff members. Please allow a couple of days before you contact us saying you haven't received your certificate. Now I'd like to introduce our presenter, Renee Cavallaro, MSS LCSW CAA DC, owner and leadership development consultant for HOPE, How Organizations Promote Excellence. Renee Cavallaro is a leader in the behavioral health field for over 23 years. Throughout her career, she has maintained a focus on sustaining an environment that promotes positive, forward-thinking culture and commitment to mission and vision. She is the owner and leadership development consultant for HOPE, How Organizations Promote Excellence, whose mission is enabling individuals who are interested in leading by example to develop their talents and utilize the tools available to be respected and successful leader. Renee has been a strong voice for the workforce development, team building, and bridging the gap between clinical excellence and administrative support. Her ability to build and empower teams is seen throughout her professional experiences and her relationship with others. Renee's professional journey has included leadership development, community-based behavioral health organizations, continuous quality improvement, behavioral health, managed care, higher education, sales, marketing, and communication outreach, and telebehavioral health. Renee is also a co-author of a book entitled Boost Your Self-Care, Be Assertive, which was written with a focus of empowering people, encouraging them to use their voice and improve their self-confidence. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Rachel. That was so nice of you to share all that information. Welcome to everyone. Thanks for joining me. It's great that you're here. This is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. So it's really exciting for me to be able to be with you all today to talk about leadership development and assertive communication. It's really two of my passions. So to be able to have this time with you, I'm really excited to be here. As Rachel said, if there's any questions, please feel free to ask. We will be addressing them. Let me just share a little bit about, so as Rachel shared, I am the owner and leadership development consultant for HOPE. I have a couple of things that I really enjoy doing with that, but one is really working with individuals and with teams that want to work to their fullest potential. So really having that opportunity to be able to share my experiences, both as a clinical leader as well as an administrative leader. And we're going to talk about what leadership is, in addition to what assertiveness is, because leadership does not mean a title. You don't have to have a leadership title in order to want to be a leader within your organization and ultimately within your life. So really a lot of these skills are going to be transferable to almost anything that you decide to do. So we'll talk a little bit about that. We'll talk a little bit about how assertive communication can really have a positive impact on your development as a professional, as well as personally. So let's get started. The session description, obviously you guys can read that, but really we're talking about how communication skills are an essential part of relationships, right? You have to be able to communicate and communicate well if you want to maintain and sustain relationships. And as we said, that's what leadership is about. So really, it's not just about the person who is the leader, but it's about that person working with the individuals that they have the pleasure of working with every day, helping them to find their passion and their skills and hone those so that every person on a team can be a leader in their own way, which is really, fun to watch people do that. And then we're going to talk about specifically what assertiveness is, what assertive communication is, and how we can build those skills into your practice. So some of the objectives, we're going to talk about assertive communication. We're going to talk about the differences between assertiveness, aggression, and passivity, because some people mistake one for the other. Most people know what passivity is, but sometimes people mistake assertiveness for aggressiveness, or aggressiveness for assertiveness. So we'll talk a little bit about that, and then we'll talk about how to effectively utilize those skills as well. In addition, we're going to talk about how using assertiveness skills in your own professional lives is going to help the individuals that you work with, no matter what the setting is. I've worked in a lot of different settings. I've worked in community residential programs. I've worked in an outpatient setting. I've worked in IOP, intensive outpatient, partial hospital programs, telepsychiatry. So it really works in whatever setting that you're interested in using that. So we're going to talk about how, in addition to you using the skills, you can teach them to others. We're also going to talk about how developing leadership throughout an organization, how assertiveness is one of those things that can do that, and how that kind of direct, honest communication will help build leadership in an organization. So here's some, just some examples of some definitions for assertiveness, for aggression, and for passivity. So as you look, assertiveness is expressing yourself and your rights without violating the rights of others. So you're saying what you need to say while not stepping on another person. Expressing your thoughts and feelings clearly, that sustains open communication. Speaking your mind without trying to influence others. And that means forcefully. It doesn't mean that you don't want to have an effect on somebody, but it does show and share the thoughts that you're having. So that's assertiveness in general. There's lots of different definitions. Aggression. So most people know what aggression is. Behavior that is forceful, hostile, attacking, meant to dominate or show mastery over another person. Not with respect at the heart of that. Assertiveness at the heart of that kind of behavior is respect. With aggressiveness, a lack of respect is present there. And then for passivity, it's basically submitting to the influence of someone else. So you don't have your own thoughts, you don't have your own ideas. You're really just saying, hey, whatever you say is fine, no problem. When I do this in a group where I'm actually getting a chance to interact with the participants, I talk through what is called an assertiveness quiz. And basically it just talks about some ideas, some examples of assertiveness, and where do you gauge yourself there. So I have people assign a number from 5 to 1, 5 being always, 1 being never, and then you'll add them up at the end. So I'm just going to give you a couple of examples and just have you think for a moment where you think you might fall on this. So one of the questions is, I ask others to do things without feeling guilty or anxious. So for many people, even those that are pretty assertive, it's not always easy to ask someone to do something, whether it be, professionally, I need you to attend this meeting and I want you to share your ideas. Or it could be, I need you to do this project by a certain time. If there's a particular time frame set up. Personally, it could be, most people say, I need you to do me a favor. And oftentimes it's not really a favor. It's something that you need somebody to do, but you soften it by asking, hey, could you do me a favor? So think about that. Where are you on that continuum? Assertiveness is a continuum. If you think about it, assertiveness is kind of in the middle. And you've got aggression and passivity on either ends of the spectrum. And so not everybody is always set right in the middle of being assertive. So sometimes you lean more towards aggressive, some more towards passive. So where do you see yourself with that when you think about that? Here's another one. So when someone asks me to do something I don't want to do, I say no without feeling guilty or anxious. So what's that experience like for you? How is it to say no to someone? Some things may be very easy to say no, and you're very clear, no, I can't do that. For others, it may be more challenging. Learning how to say no and say no respectfully and clearly is a really great skill, both professionally and personally. But professionally, it depends on the situation, right? So if your supervisor asks you to do something that is reasonable and within the scope of your work, it doesn't make sense to say no. However, if you have coworkers that see you as someone who is a hard worker, always going above and beyond, and they may not be like that. They may ask you to do and do and do. And at some point, you have to figure out, okay, how do I say no in a way that doesn't shut a door, but a way that really maybe enables somebody else to use their talents in a way they hadn't thought about that. So think about where on that continuum do you fall with being able to say no and not feeling guilty. So sometimes you can say no, but you might feel guilty and guilty, consistently guilty. And so we want to try and stop those feelings of guilt on a regular basis. I'm comfortable when speaking to a large group of people. That's not necessarily always tied to being assertive or not. There are plenty of people that may not identify themselves as innately assertive, but still may feel comfortable talking in a group. So it doesn't mean that you may not get nervous before you get up and speak, but how comfortable are you in that? I have two daughters, a 15-year-old and an 11-year-old, and both of them are learning in school public speaking, each to a different degree. But I know as a kid, I don't really remember having to do that, maybe a little bit in high school, much more in college. But it's a really wonderful skill for young people to be learning now because there's so much opportunity out there to do that. And there are some people that speak all the time and still get very nervous about it. So it's not a matter of not feeling nervous or anxious or planful about it, but just how do you feel about that? And do you want to do things differently? I confidently express my honest opinions to authority figures. That's an important one, especially in our work, whether you're a supervisor or not. We all have bosses, right? So we all have somebody that we're accountable to. So how do you express your opinions to that person in a respectful and honest way? There are going to be times where you may be the sole dissenter in a group. I don't know if you've ever had the experience of being in, let's say, a meeting with 5 people, 10 people, 35 people, and almost everybody, if not everybody, has an opinion, and you may have a different one. Are you comfortable speaking up and sharing your opinion? If you are assertive on a regular basis, more than likely you'll be comfortable with that, but it's not something that happens right off the bat. Assertiveness is something that I practice almost, if not every day. Some days I'm really excited about the opportunity, and other days there are times where I think, wow, I've been assertive a lot today. Can I pass that on to somebody else? And that's okay. It's all right to say to somebody else, hey, listen, would you stand in for me, and would you, speak about this issue? It doesn't make you any less assertive. It makes you pretty aware, self-aware of what your needs are and how you can get them met. So that's something to really think about. Where's your confidence level? And part of the discussion around assertiveness and around leadership is around confidence. Self-confidence is really important, and it's important to have that balance between knowing that you're good at something and being able to demonstrate that without, one, making somebody else feel bad about something they may or may not know, and two, being able to balance that confidence with stepping over the line to where it's, somebody would say you're a know-it-all or being haughty about it. There's something wonderful when you see self-confidence in someone. You can really be proud and say, look at that person. You can tell they're confident and not arrogant, right? Because some people could have a level of confidence that others might misconstrue as arrogant. So it's really important to know yourself, to know where you stand with that. Another question on the quiz is, when I express anger, I do so without blaming others for making me mad. So one of the things that we learn in assertive communication, learning those skills, is someone else can't make you feel a certain way. Now, something they did may elicit certain feelings in you, but it can't necessarily make you feel that way. You have your feelings, you're entitled to them. Other people don't necessarily have to agree, but it's your feelings. And so being able to own those and not put the responsibility on somebody else is a way to communicate assertively. So here's one. When I make a mistake, I acknowledge it. This is one that in the work that I do is really important, because last I looked, none of us are perfect. And so it is important to be able to, one, make a mistake and be gracious about it, own it, acknowledge it, learn how to do things differently so that maybe you don't make that same mistake twice. It is wonderful to be able to give grace to somebody else when they make a mistake. You know, I'm sure many of you, if not most of you, have been in situations where someone makes a mistake and either a supervisor, a leader, or somebody else that identifies himself in that way points it out, highlights it, and then doesn't let it go, or keeps bringing it back again and again and again. And if you've ever been in that situation, it's awkward, it's terrible, it doesn't feel good. And that's not a good example of a leader. So allowing someone to make a mistake doesn't mean you push it under the rug, but it's a way where you can say, hey, listen, here's how I would do it, or how else could you have done this next time? You know, if you keep making the mistake, 10, 20 times, maybe that's a different story and that requires a different intervention. But making a mistake now and again, or every day on something different, how do you learn if you don't make mistakes? Plenty of people that have been successful in the world have made lots of mistakes, and oftentimes, although I don't like to use the word failure, but it happens, lots of failures lead to wonderful successes. So if we hold ourselves to that standard of everybody makes a mistake, it allows for you to be kind to yourself and others when those things occur. Here's another one. So I can tell others when their behavior creates a problem for me. So when you're being assertive, you can say to someone else, I don't agree with your opinion, or what you're saying is making, I feel uncomfortable when you're saying X, Y, Z. It's those kinds of things to be able to, again, whether it's in a professional setting or even a personal setting, if something's making you uncomfortable, or if you're feeling, right, others can't make us. So if I'm feeling uncomfortable about something, being able to share with that person how it is, or what it is, or what could they do differently, is an important way of practicing assertiveness. I assume that most people are competent and trustworthy and do not have difficulty delegating tasks to others. So if you think about that, approaching a situation where you want to promote leadership, one way to do that is to trust that other people can be successful in a situation. Even if it's not the same way that you would do it, it's an important way for others to learn how to be creative, right? So other professionals need to learn how to do things, and it kind of ties to that when we talk about making mistakes. So allowing others to get to maybe the same end result, but in a different and creative way. Sometimes, I don't know if you're anything like me, at times I will delegate and I will allow others to do things. And I may think, you know what, I would do that differently, or I might be able to get that done in a different way, in a different time frame. But it makes me proud to see others succeeding, because I know that they've really put the time and energy into that, and they're able to get to that point where they need to. And I think probably the last one we'll talk through is, I believe my needs are as important as those of others, and I am entitled to have my needs satisfied. Oftentimes, as professionals, I'm a mom, as I shared, so I can at times push my needs to the side. And it's okay, it's my choice. If I feel upset by that on a regular basis, sometimes that's an example of passivity, where I just keep allowing, one of the ways that we describe passivity is, if you think of a doormat, and it's, it's not the nicest way to think of it, but it is a visual, right? So others just keep stepping on you and not listening and wanting their needs met before yours. So it's important to have that balance. How do I get my needs met, and how do I allow others to get their needs met as well? So those are some of the things that when you are thinking about where you fall on that assertiveness spectrum, where you can be thinking, hey, these are some of the ways that, these are some of the questions, it's not an exhaustive list, but these are some of the questions I might ask myself. And then you decide for yourself, where do you fall? Where do you want to be different? And then that's where you identify to make changes if you decide to do that. So here's some of the benefits of using assertive communication skills, right? So you're going to feel An increased self-esteem, increased effectiveness in your communication. People will, maybe not right off the bat, but people will start to listen and trust that you know what you're saying and that you have that confidence to be able to share that. Increased feelings of empowerment. This is for yourself and for the individuals with whom you work. Increased sense of control over situations. So again, if you're anything like me, I like to know that I have a sense of control, and there are plenty of situations, as I'm sure you can all relate, where you don't always have that control. So how do I take as much control as I can and be comfortable using those skills in that way? And then a decreased sense of victimization. So especially in behavioral health, but I think in any setting, there are times where the individuals that we work with can often feel victimized from their families, from the system, from other peers, lots of things. So how do we make that shift, either for ourselves or for the individuals we work with, shift from feeling a victim to feeling empowered and having as much control as you can over that situation? So assertiveness and learning these skills can help in that area. There are also some challenges, especially if it's not something that you've done or done regularly. Not being sure what the other person is going to think. Are they going to be angry with what we're saying? Are they going to be confused by how we're saying it, what we're saying? Is there a level of discomfort? You know, are they saying we're making them feel uncomfortable even though they have to own their own feelings? And frustration. What are they talking about? Why are they talking this way? One of the techniques that I'm going to share with you is called the broken record technique. And I'm probably dating myself by talking about records, but I would hope most of us, if you've not had one, you know someone that had one. So you know a record, if it's skipped, it would say the same thing over and over and over again. So the broken record technique is just that, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But some people could get frustrated with that and say, when are they going to stop saying that same thing? But what happens is that technique in particular puts somebody in a way where they start to think like, I can't really come up with something to defend or to come back at that. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Fear of the unknown, right? So not knowing or not feeling comfortable with practicing assertive communication skills. I started, it's probably been 15 years now that I've been using these skills. And early on, I did not have a level of confidence. I worked for a community mental health center with, as Rachel talked about, I co-authored a book with one of my peers, and we ran an assertiveness group for about 4 years. And while I was a practiced, a seasoned clinician, I didn't necessarily feel confident with using those skills because I didn't use them on a regular basis. As I started to practice more, and pretty much every day, they became more what I did on a regular basis. And I'm not perfect. There are times where I look and say, wow, that might have been a little more aggressive than I wanted. And I'll go back to the person and say, hey, that's not how I wanted to present that. Let me go back, and this is how I would have wanted to say it. But it is something that as you practice, it will be more comfortable for you, and others will start to see a difference. And interactions do start to change when you utilize those skills. And then fear of failure. What if I don't do it right? While there are guides on what assertive communication is, there's no right or wrong in that specific way. I mean, obviously, if you're screaming at someone, that's not being assertive. So that wouldn't be the right way to act assertively. But there are all, we all have some level of, am I going to do it right? Am I worried about that? Be real with yourself. When you talk about, the work that we do, especially working with individuals that need our support, they know when we're being genuine and not, and we're human, right? So being able to say, yeah, I'm not sure about that. Or as I was asking Rachel before we got started, like, what if you can't hear me or something like that happens? Are you going to let me know? And even though technology is wonderful, there are times when, maybe it doesn't work that way. So acknowledging to the other person, wow, here's an example where you use self-disclosure in a positive way that serves a benefit for the individuals we're working with. So those are some challenges. Some strategies. So here's some of the ones that, I start out with broken record technique. So let's talk a little bit about what the broken record technique is. And really the idea behind it is to repeat yourself so that the person on the other end of the interaction realizes there's nowhere for them to go. So if somebody says, you know, I don't like what you said, I don't like what you did. Broken record technique is something like you could say, oh, I hear what you're saying. I appreciate you sharing that with me. I'll try to change next time. Yes, but you didn't do it right. And they want, you know, as you hear that statement, blood from a stone, right? You can't get blood from a stone. Well, for them to keep saying, no, but I want you to feel bad about it, or I hear what you're saying. Thank you for sharing. If you say that one or two more times, most of the time that individual is going to get tired of hearing, like, why are they repeating themselves? What do you say to that, right? If you have somebody saying to you, if the purpose of the interaction is to make the other person, if that person is trying to, even though we don't have to own their feelings, they're trying to make you feel badly about something that you did. If you continue to say, I hear you, I appreciate you sharing, I'll do something different, and they want to keep going, what's the purpose in that? So the broken record technique enables you to diffuse a situation in a way that enables that person to save face, and it enables you to save face. Again, we all make mistakes. I share an example of probably somewhere I worked about 10 years. It was a community residential program. And I was new. I was I was a director of admissions and had not done an admission into the program, and was sitting in on one of my team members who had done that learning so that I could know how to do it going forward. And I had not made a follow-up appointment or something that needed to be done. And it was a mistake. And it was one that I'll tell you, I didn't make it again. But the person, the psychiatrist that I was interacting with wanted me to really feel that, and kept saying, yeah, but you didn't do it. I know I didn't do it. I'll do it today and make the appointment. So there was no harm, no foul. Ultimately, yeah, but you didn't do it. And 3 or 4 times said the same thing. And I said, thankfully, having the practice of assertiveness skills, you know, I can appreciate the fact that I made a mistake. I'm going to do it differently next time. I have remedied it today. And really, what do you say after that? There was nowhere else to go. But it was very good practice for me, and it was a very good learning experience for me and my team members to know, like, wow, you know, anybody can make a mistake and you can come back from it and you can do it better the next time. So that's an example of the broken record technique. Use of I statements, we're going to talk a little bit more about that. I have a slide on it in particular. I statements are so helpful, as you can imagine, because you're owning your feelings. I feel such when you do something. They are really important because it allows you to share how you're feeling and doesn't put the other person on the defensive. Many times, and I'll still catch myself every once in a while saying, you made me, or you did this, or you. And if you know what it's like when somebody says you did this, oftentimes it can put them on the defensive. So using an I feel statement allows for you to own your feelings and that other person to hear a little bit better. Now, not always. Some people, you know, they'll say, I don't want you to feel that way, or they'll try to change you, but your feelings are yours. And in my book, one of the things that we have is a feelings chart. So for anybody that's ever seen, they're all different. They all look lots of different ways, and it's not an exhaustive list. But what it does is it helps to enable individuals to put names to their feelings. One of the neutral ones that I like to use is surprised. Anybody that knows me, oftentimes, you know, if I'm not prepared to share frustrated or angry or something that has a lot of emotion tied to it, you could say, I feel surprised by something. And then while it's a truthful statement, there are some things that you can be surprised. It allows it to be a little more neutral. So you don't have to feel as vulnerable maybe in that situation. Sometimes it's easier to start there. And then once you get comfortable in it, share more descriptive feelings. It's something, again, you know, I shared that I have 2 girls, and it's something that I've been teaching them from the time they were very little. And now that they're growing up, they're, oh, here goes mom again with the feelings. But I'll tell you, at maybe 6, 8, 10, I was getting, maybe not necessarily I feel frustrated, but I'm frustrated, or I'm angry, or you know, I'm upset. And it's really important to be able to name those and to give that permission and that information for the individuals we're working with to name those feelings. Because once you have once you can identify what that is, it makes it somewhat easier to be able to move forward. Like some people would rather be angry than hurt or upset. Anger oftentimes is an easier emotion to sit in when you have to acknowledge, I feel hurt, upset. That makes you a little more vulnerable. So it's being able to identify those kinds of things. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about I feel statements. Fogging phrases. So fogging, as you can imagine, right, when there's fog, you can't necessarily see clearly through what's onto the other side. And the idea of fogging or fogging phrases is to soften the interaction so that, again, it's similar to broken record technique. Oftentimes when you use the broken record technique, you're using fogging phrases. So you're saying that may be, I hear you, I understand what you're saying, you're entitled to your opinion is a big one, because again, when there's discussions on things, when you talk about, oftentimes people say we don't discuss politics in our house because we have very different ideas. Most often, you're not going to change somebody's idea, whether they fall in one party or another, one opinion or another, but yet people want to change other people's opinions. So fogging, by saying you're entitled to your opinion, and then you could follow it up with, and I don't have to agree, allows for there to be discussion or not, but an understanding and a respect for that other person's opinion. You don't have to agree with it. You could say, you might be right, I understand. There's all kinds of different fogging phrases. But the idea behind them is to, again, diffuse a situation. I hear you. Sometimes when people have lots to say, if you say, I hear you, I understand, you're not agreeing with them. And that's the difference. I think for some people, acknowledging that they can hear and understand something, they mistake that for acceptance or agreement. There's plenty of times where I have interactions where I may dissent on one thing or another, but I can still respect that that person feels strongly about that opinion. So fogging phrases allow for that, you may be right, I hear you, you're entitled to your opinion. That's a really popular one. So those are some of the things where you can practice those fogging phrases as you're practicing your assertiveness skills. Use of facts, not judgments. As you know, if you've ever been judged for anything, a judgment can be very harmful. So sticking to the facts of the situation. I feel frustrated. Let's say you're a supervisor and you're the person that you're working with is consistently late, and they don't really tell you, they just show up and when they want to. And so you could say, I feel frustrated when you show up at 9:12. When you showed up at 9:12 today, and last week you showed up at 9:15, and so it's a fact. The clock, now maybe the clock's off a few minutes, but you're not saying, you're not making a judgment like, well, you must not care about your work because you're late. It's truly a fact that I'm looking at the clock, it's late. It allows for there to be some discussion versus throwing a judgment out there when you may or may not know what is lending to that. Maybe the person has a loved one that they have to care for and give, daily medicine to in the morning before they go to work. I often say to people there's so much that, especially for parents, but for caregivers, for anything that you may do before you even come into the office or the workplace. So you never quite know what somebody has gone through before they get there. So sticking to the facts allows for someone to not feel judged and allows for maybe the conversation to be open a little bit more. And then keeping a daily thought record. For anybody that knows about cognitive behavioral therapy, daily thought records are very common and a useful tool. It's also useful for us as professionals. And the reason why is when you're practicing assertiveness skills, it's important to know, where were you comfortable? Where were you not? Where do you have areas for development that you can work on? All of these things can be a part of your toolkit that when you're looking to support the leadership development of yourself, of the people that you work with, these are different tools that you can use to promote that in the work that you're doing. Okay, so those are some strategies. As I said, we're going to talk a little bit more about I statements. So here is an example of an I feel statement that goes from start to finish. So I feel, state, how do you feel? However it is, angry, frustrated, upset, happy, surprised, you name it, you could probably, identify at least 3 or 4 feelings that might be applicable to what you're discussing. So I feel this way when you, and identify, no judgment, just an observation, like I shared. I feel frustrated when you come into the office late. And sometimes I feel statements end there. They don't go any further. You don't have to. You can if you want to, but it takes practice to be able to share a little bit more about what that looks like, how it works. So I feel when you, because, so you can, if you want to, share what the reason is and how does that, interfere with your wants or needs. So I feel frustrated when you come into the office late because it prevents us from completing our daily staff meeting on time so that we can get out onto the unit, something like that, right? So you're giving it's a concrete, there's no judgment there. It's just, we're trying to get something done and we can't get it done. And then what would you like? I want you to come into work on time. That's just one example. There's plenty I'm sure you can think of as a professional, plenty of other examples where you may want to use this and practice it. And it's something that I do try to practice on a regular basis because for me, I feel statements are my go-to, or I statements are my go-to when it comes to not only practicing assertiveness, but encouraging it in other people. And part of being a leader in your profession, being a leader in your workplace, being a leader in your life is being able to own your feelings, own your behaviors, and not try to put the responsibility on somebody else. And that's really a basic tenet of being a leader and being a leader that uses assertiveness skills. So I'm sure you can think about, plenty of times, hopefully, where you have, or at least in one workplace, where you have had a leader that you would identify as a mentor, somebody who you really value, who you learned a lot from. Those leaders are so important in organizations, and it's part of what prompted me to even start, thinking about being a consultant and doing that. I have found even from my very first job I worked at, and I learned so much, I'll tell you, as a partial hospital therapist, working with individuals. I have a background in, my bachelor's is in criminal justice. And so I worked with the individuals that were coming in that not only had mental health issues, also had substance use issues, as well as either, being on probation or parole, something like that. So it was a really neat opportunity to be able to bring all of my experiences educationally into my learning as a professional. And it was one of those things where if I had to look back, I guess innately always wanted to do a good job, be promoted within an organization, but also bring others along with me. And being able to own my feelings and know how I felt, because there were plenty of times where I did not feel, I felt unprepared to know what was I supposed to do. How do you learn? You learn on the fly. So I was lucky to have good supportive supervisors who promoted wellness and learning and development in the work that I did. And I knew that that's what I wanted to do with and for others. And so it's important for each of us, no matter what role we have within an organization, to be able to support others wanting to grow professionally. And it doesn't mean, there are some people within an organization who are individual contributors and want to stay there for their entire careers. That is wonderful. We need people that want to be individual contributors and do a wonderful job there. We need that. So not everybody has to want to be promoted and go to the next one and the next one and the next one. That is something that I've enjoyed throughout my career. But I've always told people, especially when we talked about leadership, and they'll say, well, I don't want to be a leader. I want to be this, and that's what I want. Wonderful. It doesn't mean you can't be a leader. It doesn't mean you have to have that leadership title, and everybody has leadership qualities. It's our job, for anybody that's a supervisor of any person or team, to help those people or that individual find what their talents are. Same thing with the individuals that we work with. Most individuals that we work with are used to being identified, and depends on the setting, but I've been in the field long enough where we talked about the recovery movement. Everybody used to be called a patient. And sometimes, in hospital settings or other settings, they may still utilize that, and that's, there's no judgment there, but that was how individuals identified themselves. I'm a this diagnosis or that diagnosis. And what we learned as a part of the recovery movement is that is a person who is dealing with whatever it is. Oftentimes, although you hear some people say, that you hear that's a person that has diabetes. Although you do hear diabetic, it's someone who has that issue. And all of us probably could identify ourselves as someone who has something, whatever that something is. We are not defined by what that something is. And encouraging the individuals we work with, as well as our coworkers and our supervisors and such, to be able to find those strengths and those leadership qualities is so important. And it could be anything. It could be compassion, an ability to listen, being reflective, caring, sharing intelligence. It's important for us to be able to share our time, our talents, and our treasure, right? So how do we do that, and how do we foster that in others? I recently got my website for my consulting business up and running. And one of the things I'm trying to do is, on a weekly basis, share some thoughts. This week I shared about being thankful, right? It's Thanksgiving tomorrow. So how do we identify ways to be thankful? I talked about recognition. How do you show recognition and say to someone, thank you for what you're doing? How do you, World Kindness Day was a couple weeks ago. How do you demonstrate kindness and truly listen to the individuals that you're working with, that you're walking alongside in their journeys? And so these I statements, being assertive, is a way to help foster those leadership qualities in individuals. So it's really something important to think about, how that may work for you in the work that you're doing. So here's some strategies for teaching others. One of the important ways to be able to teach others is, one, to be practiced for yourself. But even that, if you don't feel 100% confident in practicing the skills all the time, you can still teach them to other people. But you want to make sure that they have an understanding of, whoever it is, the differences between assertiveness, aggression, and passivity. Because again, oftentimes with assertiveness, sometimes people will mistake that for aggression, you just speaking up for yourself and identifying how you feel about things. You hear about passive aggressive, right? People often, well, that was passive aggressive. Passive aggressive is aggression. Sarcasm is a form of aggression, and most of us use that. I mean, I use it. Sometimes it's a diffuser, it's a stress reliever. What I found though is I will practice saying, if I'm using it, okay, I'm being sarcastic. But in that, if you ever truly listen, sometimes people are sarcastic and be like, oh no, I don't care about that, everything's fine. In the heart of those things, there's a nugget of truth in there. So I always want to listen. If you sense sarcasm in someone, give them an opportunity to talk through. Maybe they're just not comfortable presenting whatever the issue is. So giving them that opportunity to really be able to say, hey, let's open the door for a discussion. When I run meetings, when you talk about leadership, if I run meetings, one of the things I would often do at the end is say, is there anything left on the table? Do we have anything else to discuss? And if people choose not to, then they've lost the opportunity to, at least in that moment, share what they were thinking. But if you allow for that time, if someone maybe was a little bit uncomfortable but felt like, well, you asked, so here I'm going to tell you, it allows for some really wonderful discussions, because then they have the opportunity to be able to say, yeah, this did actually bother me, and let's talk about it. So knowing the differences is really important to be able to teach others. Mentally rehearsing. That's a really important one too, because if you're anything like me, I need to practice some things before they become a habit. So I will make sure, if it's something, especially if it's something that's uncomfortable, you have to have that hard conversation with somebody who you work with that you're supervising, that maybe they need to change their behavior. Practicing it. What am I going to say? How am I going to say it? When you talk about role playing, the next one, that's something I know it when I was a student, was something I would often dread. I know some people love role play. I think there is so much value in it. It was just awkward being like, oh, how's that person going to know? And what if I say the wrong thing? It's not about saying the wrong thing. It's about practicing it, not only mentally, but with another person who may or may not be able to say, well, here's what they might say. If they say this, what would you do? If they say that, what would you do? We often do it, if you've ever heard of mind reading, you often do it anyway, think, well, I know what that person's going to say. Sometimes you're right on and sometimes you're not. So being able to rehearse it in your mind and then role play it with someone else is an excellent way of practicing those skills. And find somebody that you trust, a coworker, a loved one, your supervisor, whoever it is that you trust. Doing those role plays makes it very helpful, and it makes it more comfortable as you practice that. Setting boundaries is important, especially when you're being assertive, when you're learning to be a leader, knowing, when we talked about early on that assertiveness quiz, knowing when to say no. Again, it's not always something easy, but it is something important, because being able to set boundaries is ethical practice. So knowing where your limits are, clinically, knowing what you know and what you don't know is really important to be able to make sure that you're providing quality clinical services, knowing here's where I'm comfortable and here's where I maybe need to make recommendations for someone else. Also, the use of nonverbal communication. So eye contact is really important. Imagine if you're sitting in a meeting or in a therapy session or a group therapy session, and you're sitting there kind of laying back and not really paying attention, or one of the people that are in there are acting that way. That's telling, right? So nonverbal communication is really important. Eye contact in particular, when you're practicing assertiveness skills, giving that person the time and the attention. In today's world with technology, you may notice every once in a while I'm looking to make sure time is okay. So you may see my eyes look away, but being able to be mindful and present with that person and not trying to multitask. In this world especially, plenty of people, we value multitaskers, right? I'm one, it's great to be able to multitask. However, there are times when you have to give your full focus, and it's really important to be able to do that. So these are some of the strategies for practicing that. And here's some keys, although I'm not big into, catchy phrases or things like that. But I think it's important to be able to, I came up with this as I was thinking about what are the keys to being successful when you talk about being assertive. And they really are practice. I cannot overstate how important practice is in doing this, in learning these skills. It is essential to being able to know how to do them, feel comfortable, know how to do them well. So persistence, sticking with it, right? Making sure that, like, okay, I'm going to try this, I'm going to try it again. Very similar to perseverance, but perseverance even has that more long-term, long-running effects. Like, I am going to stick with this, even if it takes me months. This is what I'm going to do, and this is how I'm going to do it. Positive self-talk, again, it's one of those things where positive self-talk is an important skill for you as well as the individuals you walk alongside in their journeys. Oftentimes, the individuals that we work with are taught to, whether overtly or not, that their voice isn't important, and being able to give positive thoughts about things that are good, strengths today. And it may just be, you got up and out of bed in the morning. Great. If that's the greatest strength of the day, wonderful. As you get more comfortable with those things, being able to identify, even if you make a mistake, I did this well, I'm going to do this a little bit differently. Positivity and paying that positivity forward is essential in the work that we do. And then proof, that's a little bit of a stretch, but proof and feelings of increased self-esteem. Really feeling good about yourself genuinely. Doesn't mean you're always happy, doesn't mean everything is great all of the time, but being able to stay focused and feeling good about you and about the work that you're doing. As social workers, we really have to push that for others, but for ourselves as well. And that's part of the reason, and this gives you some information about me and the work that I'm doing, but part of the reason why my colleague and I wrote the book that we did was really to help others learn to be assertive, but to really have that focus on self-care, on confidence building. It's not written for professionals, although it's perfectly applicable. I've had lots of people say, I carry it in my bag, I highlight it, I use these things, I practice them. It's just a wonderful way, being able to take care of yourself and being able to feel comfortable acknowledging the positivity in yourself allows you then to be able to acknowledge that in other people. And that really is important, to be able to push that and pay that forward in helping others feel good about themselves. So feel free, if you want to take a look at my website, Hope, again, How Organizations Promote Excellence. It gives me the opportunity, if you have questions, you want to talk about it more, feel free to reach out to me. I try to do weekly updates, so if you want to subscribe to those, you can. There's my email address if you have an interest in contacting me about this, you have questions, you're not quite sure, you want to learn a little bit more about assertiveness. If you choose to, feel free to, you can look on Amazon for my book, you can look on Barnes & Noble. Balboa Press is the publishing company, so feel free. It's a quick read. I had a friend of mine in the summer say, I'm gonna take it as a beach read. And I said, make sure you take another book because it's not going to take you that long. So it really, it was a fun opportunity to be able to share what I do professionally, but what I do personally. And I think if I, had one more thing to share, and then, I'll ask Rachel if anybody has any questions. The importance of using assertiveness in developing as a leader in whatever way that works and that you're comfortable with. Assertiveness is one of those skills where as you use it, as you practice it, it will help you to feel a level of self-confidence that will allow you to want to lead in whatever way works for you. So I really appreciate your time this afternoon. I'm curious, Rachel, if there are any questions. I want to wish everybody a very happy Thanksgiving. This timing, I appreciate your time, especially. I know this is a busy travel day. So it really was my pleasure to have this time to spend with you and share some of what I love to do on a regular basis. So thank you.
Okay, Renee, my first question is, do you think including a because statement helps encourage behavioral change more than not including it?
That's a great question. So I would say yes. And the reason why, although if you're not comfortable saying it, it's okay, it allows that person to know where a little more detail about how you're feeling and why you're feeling that way. So while it's not essential, it really is something that adds a little more oomph to what you're sharing with them, and allows them to have the potential to say, oh, not only are they sharing how they feel, why they feel that way, but this is what they would, this is the reason why they're feeling that way. That's a good question. Thank you.
And then the other question is, when you speak of increased feelings of empowerment with those with whom you work, are you referring to coworkers, people you serve, or both?
Both. And that is a great question, because if we promote empowerment with our coworkers, it allows for a positive work environment. And so anybody that's worked in a work environment that's like that, you want to go to work every day. Sometimes things can be stressful and busy, but you enjoy the people that you work with. You like going there. You look forward to it. It promotes some creativity with the individuals that you're working with and those that you serve. Promoting a sense of empowerment there really allows them to be the people. They're directing their own destiny. So we are not the experts in their lives, they are. So empowering them allows them to feel like the expert, versus now there may be things that we know about our field, about the work that we do, but they know themselves best. And so giving them the power back to know who they are, what they want, and what they can give back to others really helps.
Okay, and then the next one is, I think, just a comment. It says a good book is Servant Leadership and 7 Habits of Highly Effective Leaders.
I'm sorry, what was that? It was just a comment?
Yep, it just said a good book is Servant Leadership and
yes.
7 Habits of Highly Effective Leaders.
Excellent. Yep, and that servant leadership is one that when I worked, probably a couple jobs ago, they talked a lot about that, and it really it's very applicable to the work that we do, especially as social workers. So that was a great, those are great additions to your toolkit as well.
All right, so thank you, Renee, so much for that wonderful presentation, and thank you to our members for attending. The link to the evaluation has been posted in the chat section and will remain up for a few minutes. A reminder that after you submit your evaluation, if you attended the required 50 minutes, you will receive your CE certificate via mail within a few days.
Thank you, Rachel. Thanks, everyone. Happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you, guys.